Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. This morning, I would like to tell you a story and take you on a field trip to the Tower of London. The Tower of London is actually far more than a single tower. It is a 1,000-year-old castle complex surrounded by a moat and a wall. It is actually the most visited historic site in London, with more than 8,000 visitors passing through the doors every day. They come to hear stories of kings and queens, of prisoners and executions, and sometimes they stay all day. But today we only have 7 minutes, so I'm going to rush us past the main attraction and take you to the Beauchamp Tower. So come inside. You'll need to walk up the narrow stairs to the second floor. Be careful, the place is old. It was originally built as part of the outer fortress in the 14th century. Now that we're upstairs, let's move into this cavernous room. There's a tall window overlooking the courtyard and the main castle. But the most interesting thing that you will notice about this room is that the walls are covered with graffiti. They're actually carvings made by prisoners held in the room for hundreds of years. If you follow British history, you will recognize a few famous names, people who oppose the royal crown, but there will also be names that you don't know. Near the window, at about my eye level, is one of the oldest carvings. Look closely. It's a bell with an A in the middle of it, and the name Thomas carved above it. This was made by a man who lived alone in this room for 7 years. His name is Thomas Abel. Now, I've known about Thomas Abel all my life. When I was a child, my father sometimes signed his signature with this symbol, a simple bell shape with an A in the middle of it. And he wasn't the only one. Several family members also signed their name this way. And I was told that our family had an ancestor who had carved his name and our family symbol into the Tower of London. But that was all I knew. Nobody seemed to know any of the details about this. So when I grew up, when I got older, I began to do some research. And what I learned was that Thomas Abel was a priest. In fact, he was the chaplain to Queen Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of King Henry VIII. He disagreed with the king's decision to divorce Catherine, and he began to oppose him, first secretly and then very publicly. And as you can imagine, the king did not appreciate this nonconformity, and he sent Thomas to the Tower. In 1540, Thomas was executed as a traitor. He was hung, drawn, and quartered. So those are the basic facts of Thomas Abel's case, but as I began to research more deeply, I learned even more details. Thomas was chosen to be the Queen's priest because he was a highly educated Oxford academic. He knew multiple European languages and in fact was fluent in Spanish and as well as English, of course. And so it was assumed that he could act as an informant to the king, spying on the Queen's household. After several years of service, he was sent to Spain on a mission to retrieve a sensitive document that the king hoped to keep out of the divorce hearings. When Thomas Abel arrived in Spain, he disregarded the king's instructions and instead very bravely defended Queen Catherine's cause. And this was just the beginning of Thomas's opposition to King Henry VIII. He went on to publish a scathing rebuke of the European theologians who would use the Bible to defend King Henry's actions. And then Thomas began publicly speaking against the king. It's not difficult to imagine why he ended up in the Tower of London. As I researched more, I began to ask questions. I found myself wondering, why did Thomas do what he did? Why was he so loyal to the Queen? What motivated him? So 2 years ago, I was able to go to England and I traveled to London and I saw Thomas's graffiti in the tower. Then I visited the British Library and I held one of the only 2 existing copies of the book that he wrote. And then I was able to carefully read all of Thomas's arguments. And after months of research, I concluded that Thomas was motivated by a passionate commitment to the truth and a deep loyalty to Queen Catherine. His book was very unambiguously titled Invicta Veritas, which is Latin for the unconquerable truth. The full title was Invicta Veritas, an answer that by no manner of law it may be lawful for the most noble king of England, King Henry VIII, to be divorced from the Queen's Grace, his lawful and very wife. I think I'll pick a different title for my book. As I considered Thomas's role as the confessor and chaplain to Queen Catherine, I realized that he was also likely motivated by a deep personal relationship with the Queen. Thomas had spent countless hours with Queen Catherine, listening to her confessions, listening to her prayers, listening to her pain, and I'm sure that he cared deeply for her. So as I started thinking about writing a story about Thomas, I originally thought I would write a historical biography. I'm a little more experienced in writing nonfiction, so this felt more comfortable for me. But ultimately, as I thought about Thomas's story, I decided that to make sense of his actions, I needed to explore his motivations, his feelings, and his thoughts, and it needed to be written from his point of view. And so I thought to do this most effectively, I should write it as a novel. As a result, I wrote Thomas Towers, The Story of Thomas à Beal, and it's based as closely as possible on the historical record. Interestingly, as I wrote, I noticed that Thomas's personality, the fictional Thomas's personality, began to take the shape of the à Beal men that I was already very familiar with. My father, my grandfather, my uncles, and even my son. Like Thomas, these à Beal men in my family are known for their integrity, their loyalty, their deep commitment to the truth, their love of learning, and even their passion for justice. And I realized that even without us knowing him, Thomas à Beal had shaped my family. And then I had shaped a fictional Thomas à Beal to fit into the men in my family. And so that's my story of the man who carved our name in the Tower of London. I want to thank you for coming along with me today. Thank you, Madam.